Chapter 195 of Varney the Vampire, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Julie Bynum. Varney the Vampire, Volume 3 by Peckett PREST. Chapter 195. The Vampire has serious thoughts. The dream. The resolution. The next day after the events that we have detailed, Varney found himself in a hotel in London. He did not even make the effort to inquire how the affair connected with the Lady Annetta, in which towards the last he had played a generous part, prospered. He was too spirit-broken himself to do so. For nearly the whole day he remained in a room by himself, and although to avoid uncomfortable and ungracious remarks being made by the people of the house, he ordered from time to time food and wine, he, in accordance with his horrible nature, which forbade him any nourishment but human blood, touched neither. During that day he seemed to be suffering acutely, for now and then, as the waiters of the hotel passed the door of the private room he occupied, they heard deep agonizing groans, and when once or twice they went in, fancying that he must be very ill or dying, they found him seated at a table on which his head was resting. He would start up on these occasions, and sternly question them for interrupting him, so at last they left him alone. Let us look at him in his solitude. It is getting towards the dim and dusky hours of late twilight, and he can only barely be descried, as he sits bolt upright in a high-backed arm-chair, looking at vacancy, while his lips move, and he appears to be conversing with the spirits of another world, that in their dim untangibility are not visible to mortal eyes. Now and then he would strike his breast, and utter a dull groan, as if some sudden recollection of the dreadful past had come over him, with such a full tide of horror that it could not be resisted. It was not until a considerable time had elapsed, and the darkness had greatly increased, that he at length spoke. "And I was once happy," he said mournfully, "once happy because I was innocent. O gracious Heaven, how long am I to suffer?" A spasmodic kind of movement of his whole features ensued, that was quite dreadful to look upon, and would have terrified any one who could have seen them. Then he spoke again. "I was happy 180 years ago," he said, "for that has been the awful duration of my life as yet. Yes, 180 years have, with their sunshine of summer and their winter storms, passed over my head, and I had a wife and children, who, with the innocent and gladsome prattle, would climb my knee and nestle in my bosom. Oh, where are they all now?" He wrung his hands, but he did not weep the fount of tears that had dried up for 100 years in his bosom. "Yes, yes, the grave holds them." "Holds them?" said I. "No, no, long since have they crumbled into dust, and nothing of them remains as a faint indication even of who once was human. I it was who listened to the counsels of a fiend, and destroyed her who had given up home, kindred, associations, all for me." He rose up from the chair, and seemed to think that he would find some relief in pacing the room to and fro, but he soon threw himself again into the seat. "No, no," he said, "no peace for me, and I cannot sleep. I have never slept what mortals call sleep, the sleep of rest and freedom from care. For many a long year, when I do seem to repose, then what dreadful images awake to my senses! Better, far better, than my glaring eyeballs should crack with weariness, than that I should taste such repose." The sympathetic shudder with which he uttered these words was quite proof sufficient of his deep and earnest sincerity. He must indeed have suffered much before he could have give such a sentiment such an utterance. We pity thee, Varney. "And when, oh, when will my weary pilgrimage be over?" he ejaculated. "Oh, when will the crime of murder be cleansed from my soul? I killed her. Yes, I killed her who loved me. A fiend, I know it was a fiend, whispered suspicion in my ear. Suspicion of her who was as pure as the first ray of sunlight that from heaven shows itself to chase away the night. But I listened, and then created from my own fevered brain the circumstances that gave suspicion strength and horrible consistency, and I killed her." After the utterance of these words he was silent for a time, and then in heart-rending accents he again repeated them. I killed her, and she was innocent. Then I became what I am. There was a period of madness, I think, but I became a vampire. I have died many deaths, but recovered from them all. Forever, by some strange accident or combination of circumstances, the cold moonbeams have had access to my lifeless form, and I have recovered." By this time the landlord of the hotel in which Varney was staying had got in a fearful fidget, for he began to think that he had a madman in his house, and that it would turn out that his guest had made his escape from some lunatic asylum. "I wonder now," he thought, "if a little soothing civility would do any good. I will try it. It can't surely do any harm." With this intent, the landlord went upstairs to the room in which Varney the Vampire was, and he tapped gently at the door. There was no reply, and after a few moments' consideration, the landlord opened the door and peeped in, when he saw his customer sitting in an armchair in the manner in which we have described him to sit. "If you please, sir," said the landlord, "would you not like—" "Blood," said Varney, rising. The landlord did not wait for any more, but bustled downstairs again with all the promptitude in his power. It was a bedroom and sitting room that Varney occupied at the hotel, the one adjoining the other, and now, although he groaned and sighed at the idea of repose, he flung himself upon the bed, full dressed as he was, and there he laid, as still as death itself. One of those strange, fitful kind of slumbers, such as he had himself described as being so full of dread, came over him. For a time he was still, as we have said, but then, as various images of agony began to chase each other through his brain, he tossed about his arms, and more than once the word "mercy" came from his lips in accents of the most soul-harrowing nature. This state of things continued for some considerable time, and then in his sleep a great change came over him, and he fancied he was walking in a garden replete with all the varied beauties of a southern clime, and through the center of which meandered a stream, the crystal music of which was delightfully calming and soothing to his senses. All around seemed to speak of the peace and loveliness of an Eden. As he wandered on, he fancied that some form was walking by his side, and that he heard the gentle fall of its feet and the flutter of its garments. "Varney," it said, "you have suffered much." "I have. Oh, God knows I have." "You would die, Varney, if the moonbeams could be prevented from reaching you." "Yes, yes, but how? How?" "The ocean, the deep, deep sea, hides many a worse secret than the corpse of a vampire." It might have been that, after all, his sleep was to some extent refreshing to him, or that the dream he had instilled a hope into him of a release from what, in his case, might truly be called the bondage of existence; but he certainly arose more calm, cool, and collected than he had been for some time past. "Yes," he said, "the deep sea holds a secret well, and if I could but be washed into some of its caverns, I might lie there and rot until the great world itself had run its course." This idea took great possession of him. He thought over various modes of carrying it out. At one time he thought that if he bought a boat on the sea-coast and went out alone, sailing away as far from land as he could, he might be able to accomplish his object. But then he might not be able to get far enough. At length he thought of a more feasible and a better plan than that, and it was to take his passage in some ship for any port, and watch his opportunity some night when far from land to steal upon the deck and plunge in the waves. The more he considered of this plan, the better he liked it, and the more it wore an appearance of probability and an aspect of success; so at length the thought grew into a resolution. "Yes, yes," he muttered, "who knows but that some friendly spirit, for the mid-air that floats twixt earth and heaven is peopled with such, may have whispered such counsel in my ears. It shall be done. I will no longer hesitate, but make this attempt to shake off the dreadful weight which mere existence is to me." End of chapter 195. Chapter 196 of Varney the Vampire, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Julie Bynum. Varney the Vampire, Volume 3, by Peckett PREST. Chapter 196. The Scotch Packet Ship. The Suicide. It was in pursuance of this resolution, so strangely and suddenly formed, that the unhappy Varney rose on the following morning, and went to that region of pitch, slop clothing, red herrings, and dirt, the docks. But yet, somehow, although the docks may not be the cleanest or the most refined part of the vast city of London, the coarseness and litter there, for after all it is more litter than dirt, are by no means so repulsive as those bad addenda to other localities. There is a kind of rough freshness induced by the proximity of the water which has a physical and moral effect, we are inclined to think, upon the place and the people, and which takes off much of what would otherwise wear the aspect of what is called low life. But this is all by the way, and we will at once proceed to follow the fortunes of Varney in carrying out his plan of self-annihilation. The hour was an early one, and many a curious glance was cast at him, for although he had humanized and modernized his apparel to a great extent, he could not get rid of the strange unworldlike, if we may use the phrase, look of his face. He was very pale, too, and jaded-looking, for the thoughts that had recently occupied him were not such as to do good to the looks of any one. He cared little in what vessel he embarked. He had but one object in embarking at all, and that was to get out to sea, so that the ultimate destination of the ship that should receive so very odd and equivocal a passenger was a matter of no moment. Stopping a personage who had about him a seafaring look, Varney, pointing to a bustling place of embarkation, said, "Does any vessel start from here to-day?" "Yes, there's one going now, or as soon as the tide serves her. She is for Leith." "On the coast of Scotland, I think?" "Yes, to be sure." Varney walked on until he came to a kind of counting-house, where sat a man with books before him, and not to take up more valuable space, he secured what was called a berth on board the Ocean, a small, dirty, ill-convenient ship, bound for the port near the Scotch metropolis of Edinburgh. Not wishing to be himself much noticed, and having no desire to notice anybody, Varney went down below, and seated himself in a dark corner of the generally dingy cabin, and there, amid all the noise, bawling, abuse, and bustle contingent upon getting the ill-conditioned bark under way, he never moved or uttered a word to any one, although the cabin was frequently visited. But Varney had no idea of the amount of annoyance to which he was likely, in the course of the evening, to be subjected. The vessel got under way, and as both wind and tide happened to be favorable, she dropped down the river rapidly, and soon was clear of the Nore light, and holding on her course northward. The cabin now began to fill with the passengers, and, extraordinary as the fact may appear, there were many Scotchmen actually going back again. They were, however, only going to pay visits, for it is one of the popular delusions that Scotchmen try to keep up in this country, that they have left something dear and delightful behind them in Scotland, and that, take it altogether, it is one of the most desirable spots in the whole world. It becomes, therefore, quite necessary for them to go back now and then in order to keep up that delusion. Personal vanity, too, is one of the great characteristics of the nation, and many a Scotchman goes back to Edinburgh, for example, to make an appearance among his old friends and family connections, totally incompatible with his real position in London. By about 9 o'clock at night, when the shore to the west could only be discovered as a dim gray line on the horizon, the cabin of the Ocean Packet was crammed. Whisky was produced, and a drink that the Scotch call bottled yell, meaning ale, and as these two heady liquids began to take effect, Auld Lang Syne was chanted in the vernacular by the whole party. At length a feeling of annoyance began to grow up from the fact of the isolated aspect of Varney, and the quiet, unobtrusive manner in which he looked on at the proceedings, appearing not in the smallest degree enthusiastic, even when the most uproarious Scotch songs, in the most unintelligible of all jargons, were sung, for, strange to say, the authors of that nation take a pride in slaughtering the English language. At length a Scotchman approached Varney, and said, "Ye'll take a glass of old Reekie, mon?" Edinburgh is called Reekie in consequence of the absence of drainage, giving it a horrible fetid smell, a reeky atmosphere in a manner of speaking, which may be illustrated by the Scotchman who was returning to that place from England on the top of a stage-coach, when within about 50 miles he began sniffing and working his nose in an extraordinary manner. "What are you doing that for?" said an Englishman. "Eh, mon, I can smell the good old tone." "I do not understand your language," said Varney, and he walked from the cabin to the deck of the vessel. He recoiled an instant, for the moon was rising. "Ever thus, even thus," he said. "How strange it is that I never dream of ridding myself of the suffering of living, but the moon is shining brightly. Can its rays penetrate the ocean?" The deck was very still, and silent indeed. The man at the helm, and one other pacing to and fro, were all that occupied it, save Varney himself, and he stood by the side, gazing in the direction where he had last seen the dim gray speck of land. "A pleasant run, sir, we shall have of it," said the man who had been pacing the deck, "if this kindly wind continues. It blows from the west." "Yes, nearly due west, but that suits us. We keep her head a few points inshore, and do well with such a wind, although a southwest by south is our choice." "How far are we from land?" "It's the coast of Suffolk that is to our left, but we are, I hope, a good 30 miles or more from it." "You hope?" "Yes, sir. Perhaps you are not sufficient of a sailor to know that we never hug the shore if we can possibly help it." "I understand. And there?" "Oh, there lies the German Ocean." "How deep, now, should you say the sea was here?" "Can't say, sir, but it's blue water." That was not much information to Varney, but he bowed his head and walked forward, as much as to say that he had had enough of the information and conversation of the man, who was the mate of the vessel, and quite disposed to be communicative. Perhaps, in the very dim light, he did not see exactly what a strange-looking personage he was talking to. 30 miles from land, thought Varney. Surely that is far enough, and I need have no dread of floating to the shore through such a mass of water as that 30 miles. The distance is very great. I can tonight, in another hour, make the attempt. To his great joy, some heavy clouds climbed up the sky along with the moon, and, congregating around the beautiful satellite, effectually obscured the greater number of its beams. There was, in fact, no absolute moonlight, but a soft, reflected kind of twilight coming through the clouds, and dispersed far and wide. "This will do," muttered Varney. "All I have to fear are the direct moonbeams. It is they that have the effect of revivifying such as I am." The man who had been pacing the deck finally sat down, and appeared to drop off to sleep, so that all was still; and as Varney kept to the head of the vessel, the man at the wheel could see nothing of him, there being many intervening obstacles. He was perfectly alone. Now and then, with a loud roaring about, he heard some boisterous drinking chorus come from the cabin, and then a rattle of glasses as fists were thumped upon the tables in token of boisterous approbation, and then all would be still again. Varney looked up to the sky, and his lips moved, but he uttered no sound. He went closer to the vessel's side, and gazed upon the water as it lazily rippled past. How calm and peaceful, he thought, he ought to be, far beneath that tide! A sudden plunge into the sea would have made a splash that would have been heard, and that he wished of all things to avoid. He clambered slowly over the side, and only held on by his hands for a moment. Cool night air tossed about his long elfin locks, and in another moment he was gone. End of chapter 196. Chapter 197 of Varney the Vampire, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Julie Bynum. Varney the Vampire, Volume 3, by Peckett PREST. Chapter 197. The Old Manor House, The Rescue, Varney's Despair. At about 10 o'clock on that same night on which Varney the Vampire plunged into the sea with hopes of getting rid of the world of troubles that oppressed him, a small fishing boat might have been seen a distance of about 25 miles from the Suffolk coast, trying to make for land and baffled continually by the wind that blew offshore. In this boat were two young men, and from their appearance they evidently belonged to the wealthier class of society. They were brothers. From their conversation we shall gather the circumstances that threw them into such situation, not by any means divested of peril as it was. "Well, Edwin," said one, "here we have been beating about for 5 hours, trying to get inshore, And all our little bark permits us to do is, I think, not materially to increase our distance from home." "That is about the truth, Charles," said the other, "and it was my fault." "Come, Edwin, don't talk in that way. There is no fault in the matter. How could you know that the wind would stiffen into such a breeze as it has, so that we cannot fight out against it? Or, if there be fault, of course it's as much mine as yours, for am I not here, and do I not know full well what an amount of consternation there will be at the Grange?" "There will, indeed." "Well, their joy when we get back will be all the greater. Shall we get back? Can you ask? Look at our little boat. Is she not seaworthy? Does she not dance on the waves merrily? It is only the wind, after all, that baffles us. If it would drop a little, we could, I think, make head against it with the oars." The brothers were silent now for a few moments, for they were each looking at the weather. At length Edwin spoke, saying, "We shall have the moon up, and that may make a change." "Very likely, very likely. There is not, I think, quite so much sea as there was. Suppose we try the oars again?" The other assented, and the two young men exerted themselves very much to decrease their distance from the Suffolk coast by pulling away right manfully; but it was quite evident to them that they did no good, and that they had just as well dropped westward as they had been doing by keeping the sail set and steering as near as possible to the wind. "Why, if this goes on, Charles, where shall we get to by the morning?" "To Northumberland, perhaps, or further." "Well, if we go far enough, what say you to attempting the Vexata Quaestio of the North-West Passage?" "Nay, I cannot jest. It's a sad thing, this; more sad a good deal for those who are at home than for us. To-morrow is Clara's wedding day, and what a damper it will be upon all to suppose that we have perished at sea." "They will never suppose that we would do anything so ridiculous. Why, at the worst, you know, we could go before the wind and run on to Holland." "Yes, if no storm arises, or such a gale as might founder our boat. There is the moon." "Yes, and she will soon be overtaken by yon bank of clouds that seem to be scudding after her in the blue heavens. Ha! A sail, by Jove! Where?" "Not, I think, above 4 miles there to the east, by our little compass, which it is a good thousand mercies we have with us. Look, you may see her sails against that light cloud there." "I see her. Think you she will see us?" "There is every chance, for her swell of canvas will be all the other way. Fire your fowling piece, and the sound may reach her. The wind is good for carrying it." Charles took a fowling piece from the bottom of the boat. The brothers had merely gone out at sunset, or a little before it, to shoot gulls, and he tried to discharge the piece, but several seas that they had shipped, while they were thinking of other things than keeping the gun dry, had, for the time being, most effectively prevented it from being discharged. "Ah!" said Edwin, as he heard the click of the lock, "that hope is lost." "It is indeed, and to my thinking the ship is distancing us rapidly. You see our mast and sail will, at even this distance, lie so low in the horizon that they will hardly see us unless they are sweeping the sky with a night glass, and that is not likely. Certainly not, so we have nothing for it but to hold on our way. I am getting hungry, if you are not." "I certainly am not getting hungry, for I have felt famished these last 2 hours, but I suppose we may hold out against the fiend hunger some hours yet. What are you looking at so earnestly, eh?" "I hardly know." "You hardly know? Let me see. Why, what is it?" "There seems to be something now, and that much darker than the waves, tighting on their tops. There, do you not see it? There it is again, there." "Yes, yes. What on earth can it be? A dead body." "Indeed! Ah, it drifts towards us. There is some current hereabouts, for you see it comes to us against the wind. Don't deceive yourself, brother. It is we who are going with the wind towards it. And now you can see there is no doubt about what it is. Some poor fellow who has been drowned. Get out the boat hook. Get it out." "Why, you would not take in such a cargo, Edwin?" "God forbid! But I feel some curiosity to see who and what sort of a personage it is. Here we have him. What a length he is, to be sure!" The body was nearly alongside the boat, and one of the brothers detained it with a boat hook, while they both looked earnestly at it. It was the body of a man, remarkably well dressed, and had no appearance of having been under the water long. The features, as far as they could see them, were calm and composed. The hands were clenched, and some costly-looking rings glittered on the fingers through the salt spray that foamed and curled around the insensible form. "Charles," said Edwin, "what we shall do?" Edwin shook his head. "I don't like—" "Like what?" "I don't like to cast it adrift again, and not take it ashore, where it can rest in an honest man's groan, if he be one. Fancy it being one of us! Would it not be a consolation to those who love us to know that we rested in peace among our ancestors, in preference to rotting in the sea, tossed and mangled by every storm that blows? I do not like to cast the body adrift again. It's a ghastly passenger. It is, but that ghastliness is only an idea, and we should remember that we ourselves— Stop, brother, stop! Do not fancy that I oppose your wish to convey this body to the shore, and place it in some sanctified spot. What I expressed concerning it was merely the natural feeling that must arise on such an occasion, nothing more." "Then you are willing?" "I am." The two brothers now, without further doubts or remarks upon the subject, got the body into the boat and laid it carefully down. Then Edwin folded and tied a handkerchief over the face, for, as he truly enough said, there is no occasion to have to encounter that dead face each moment that one turns one's eyes in that direction. It is sufficient that we have, by taking the body in at all, done all that humanity can dictate to us. To this Charles agreed, and it was remarked by them both as a strange thing that from the moment of their taking in the dead body to the boat the wind dropped, and finally there was almost a calm, after which there came a soft gentle air from the southeast, which enabled them with scarcely any exertion on their own parts to make great progress toward their own home, from which they found they had not by any means been driven so far northward as they had at first thought. The brothers looked at each other, and it was Edwin who broke the silence, and put into words what they both thought, by saying, "Charles, there is something more in this whole affair than what lies just upon its surface. Yes, it seems as if we were driven out to sea by some special providence to do this piece of work, and that having done it, the winds and the waves obeyed the hand of their mighty master, and allowed our return." "It does seem so," said the other. End of chapter 197. Chapter 198 of Varney the Vampyre, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Julie Bynum. Varney the Vampyre, Volume 3, by Thomas Peckett PREST. Chapter 198. A Family Scene. The Sisters. The Horrible Alarm. In the course of 2 hours more, the young men were so close inshore that they could see the lights flashing along the coast, and they even fancied they could catch a glimpse of human forms moving along with torches; and if such were the case, they doubted not but that these people were sent to serve as a guide to them, should they, with their little bark, be hovering near the coast. "Look, Edwin," said Charles. "We are expected, are we not?" "Yes, yes. I am certain that those lights are meant as guides for us. They may spare themselves the trouble, for do you not see that the clouds are wearing away, and that in a few minutes more we shall have the undimmed luster of a full moon looking down upon us? It will be so." The boat had now got so far within a large natural inlet of the ocean that but very little wind caught its gently flapping sail, so that the brothers bent manfully to their oars, and got the boat through the water at a rapid rate. Oh, how very different their sensations were now to what they had been when they were beating about at the mercy of the winds and waves, but a few short hours since, and when it certainly was but an even chance with death whether they would ever see their home again. If a gale had sprung up, accompanied by anything in the shape of a very heavy sea, they must have been lost. Soon they saw that their boat was descried, and at a particular portion of the coast there stood a complete cluster of men with torches, inviting them there to land, and they knew that such a landing place was upon their father's property, and that in a few minutes they would be safe on shore. Neither of them spoke, but reflection was busy in the hearts of both. There was a loud and thoroughly English shout as the boat grated upon the sandy beach, and Edwin and Charles jumped on shore. They were in another moment pressed in their father's arms. "Why, boys," he said, "what a fright you have given us all! There's Clara and Emma have been forced, I say forced, for nothing but force would do it, to go home, and the whole country has been in an uproar. You were blown out to sea, I suppose?" "Yes, father, but we have not been in any danger." "Not in any danger, with such a cockleshell of a boat fairly out into the German Ocean! But we will say no more about it, lads. Not another word. Come home at once, and make all hearts glad at the old Grange house." "There's something in the boat!" cried one of the men who held a light. "Good God, yes!" exclaimed Charles. "We had forgotten," said Edwin. "We met with a little adventure at sea, and picked up a dead body." "A dead body?" "Yes, father. We could not find it in our hearts to let it be, so we brought it on shore that it might have the rites of a Christian burial in the village churchyard. Somebody who loved the man may yet thank us for it, and feel a consolation to know that such had been done." "You are right, boys, you are right," said the father. "You have done in that matter just as I would wish you. I will give orders for the body to be taken to the dead house by Will Stevens, and tomorrow it shall be decently interred." This being settled, the father, accompanied by his two sons, who were not a little pleased to be safe upon terra firma again, walked together up a sloping pathway, which led to the Grange house, as it was called. The joy that the return of the brothers caused in the family, our readers may well imagine. The sisters, Clara and Emma, wept abundantly, and the mother, who had let her fears go further than any one else, was deeply affected. But it is time that we should inform the reader who these people were, whom we have introduced upon the scene of our eventful history. Sir George Crofton, for such was the name of the father of Edwin and Charles, was a wealthy, warm-hearted country gentleman, and constantly resided upon his own estate all the year round, being a good landlord to his tenantry, and a good father to his 4 children, who have already been to some extent presented to the reader. The mother was a kind-hearted but rather weak woman, with an evangelical bias that at times was rather annoying to the family. This, however, was perhaps the good lady's only fault, for with that one exception she was fond of her children to excess notwithstanding, as Sir George sometimes jestingly said he verily believed she in her heart considered they were all on the high road to a nameless abode. The night was so far advanced when the young men got home, that of course not much was said or done, and among other things that were put off until the following morning was the story of the finding of the body. "There is no occasion," whispered Sir George, "to say anything to your mother about it." "Certainly not, father. At least not till tomorrow, for if you do, I shall not get a wink of sleep for her reflections on the subject." The two young men knew very well that this was no exaggeration, and that their mother would, like any divine, eagerly seize the opportunity of what is called improving the occasion by indulging in a long discourse upon the most dismal of all subjects that the mind of any human being can conceive, namely, the probability of everybody going to eternal perdition unless they believe in a particular set of doctrines that to her seem orthodox. The consequence of this was that the dead body was quietly taken out of the boat by men who did not possess the most refined feelings in the world, and carried to the bone house. "He seems a decent sort of chap," said one, as he looked at the very respectable habiliments of the corpse. "Ah, look at the gold rings! Yes, you may look, Abel, but eyes on, hands off. Why? Why, you gawk, do you think as young Master Charles and Edwin don't know of 'em? And more besides, who would touch dead man's gold off of his fingers? Is it unlucky? Horrid! Then I'll have naught to do with 'un." The body was placed on the ground, for there was no coffin of any sort to put it in, and the door was shut upon it in the dead house, and then the party who had brought it there thought it a part of their duty to wake up Will Stevens, the sexton, and to tell him there was such a thing as a dead body placed in his custody, as it were, by being put into the dead house, which was not above 100 yards from the cottage occupied by Will. They hammered away rather furiously at his door, and no wonder that he felt a little, or perhaps not a little, alarmed upon the occasion. In a few moments a casement was opened, and out popped a head. "Hilloa, you ragamuffins! What do you mean by hammering away at an honest man's door at this rate, eh? Am I to have any sleep?" "Ragamuffin yourself!" cried one. "There's a dead body of a drowned man in the bone house. All you have got to do is look after it, and there's a lot of gold rings on its fingers, with diamonds in 'em, for all we know, worth God knows how much. You may make the most of it now that you know of it. A dead man? Who is he? Ah, that's more than we can tell. Good night, or rather good morning, old crusty. Stop, stop! Tell me—" The men only laughed, for they had no desire to protract a conversation with the sexton, and he called in vain after them to give him some further information upon the subject of this rather mysterious information. A drowned man, he pondered to himself, a drowned man, and with fingers loaded with gems, and brought to the bone house. Oh, foh! It's a hoax. That's what it is, and I won't believe it. It's done to get me up in the cold, that's all, and then there will be some trick played upon me safe, and I shall be only laughed at for my pains. Full of this idea, the sexton turned into his bed again, and hoped that by speedily going to sleep he should get the laugh of his tormentors, instead of they getting it of him, as well as lose the shivering that had come on him through standing at the open window, exposed to the night air, so indifferently clad. End of chapter 198. Chapter 199 of Varney the Vampyre, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Julie Bynum. Varney the Vampyre, Volume 3, by Peckett PREST. Chapter 199. The Sexton's Avarice, the Dead and the Living, the Ring. It was all very well for the sexton to wish and to try to get to sleep, but actually to succeed in procuring nature's sweet oblivion was quite another matter. In vain he tossed and turned about; there was no rest for him of any kind or description, dreamless or dreamful, and still he kept repeating to himself, "A dead body with gold and diamond rings in the bone house." These were the magic words which, like a spell that he was compelled by some malign influence continually to repeat, kept Will Stevens awake, until at last he seemed to lose entirely his first perception of the fact that he might be only hoaxed, and all his imagination became concentrated on the idea of how came the dead body in the bone house, and how was it that gold and diamond rings were left on its fingers in such a place. These were mental ruminations, the result of which was transparent from the first, for that result, in the natural order of things, was sure to be that the passion of curiosity would get the better of all other considerations, and he, Will Stevens, would rise to ascertain if such were really the state of things. "It ain't far off morning now," he reasoned with himself, "so I may as well get up at once as lie here tossing and tumbling about, and certainly unable to get another wink of sleep. And besides, after all, I may be wrong in thinking this is a hoax. There may really be such a dead body as those fellows mentioned in the bone house, and if there be, I ought certainly to go and look after it. We easily reason ourselves into what is our pleasure." And so, while these cogitory remarks were uttered by the sexton, he rose. He found that if he drew back the blind from before his window, the moon, which was now sailing through a nearly cloudless sky, would give him amply sufficient light to enable him to go through the process of dressing, so he at once began that operation. "Yes," he said, "I ought to go. It's my positive duty to do so, after getting the information I have, and if that information be untrue, let it recoil on the heads of those who invented the falsehood. I shall go, that's settled. What a sweet moonlight!" It was a sweet moonlight indeed. The floods of soft silvery light fell with an uncommon radiance upon all objects, and the minutest thing could have been seen upon the ground with the same clearness and distinctness as at midday. The only difference was that a soft, preternatural-looking atmosphere seemed to be around everything, and a kind of marble-like look was imparted to all objects, far and near, on which those soft silvery rays rested in beauty and sublimity. The sexton was full dressed, and although the moonlight guided him well, he thought that he might in the bone house require another mode of illumination, and he lighted and took with him a small lantern, which had a darkening shade to it. Thus prepared, he walked at a rapid pace from his own house towards the small shed-like building which served as a receptacle for the unowned dead, and for such human remains as were from time to time cast ashore by the waves, or flung up from new graves by the spade and the mattock. Familiar as he was, and had been for many a year with that bone house, and often in contact with the dead, he yet on this occasion felt as if a strange fear was creeping over him, and then a flutter of his heart and the fiery feel that was in his brain were circumstances quite novel to him. "Well, this is odd," he said, "and I suppose it is what they call being nervous. I can't make it out to be anything else, I'm sure." Thus reasoning with himself upon his own unwonted timidity, he reached the bone house. The door of the dilapidated building, which was known by that name, was only secured by a latch, for it was not considered that the contents of the place were sufficiently interesting for any one's cupidity to be excited by it. The sexton paused a moment before he lifted the latch, and glanced around him. Even then he half expected to hear a loud laugh expressive of the triumph of those who had combined to play him the trick, if it were one, of getting him out of bed on a bootless errand. But all was still around him, still as the very grave itself, and muttering then in a hurried tone, "It is true, there is no trick," he hastily opened the door and went into the bone house. All was darkness save one broad beam of moonlight that came in at the doorway, but the sexton closed the entrance and applied to his lantern for a light. He slid the darkening piece of metal from before the magnifying glass, and then a rather sickly ray of light fell for a moment upon the corpse that lay then upon its back, a ray only sufficiently strong and sufficiently enduring to enable the sexton to make quite sure that there was a body before him, and then his lantern went out. "Confound the lantern!" he said. "I ought to have looked to it before I started, instead of lighting it on the mere hazard of its going on comfortably. What's to be done? Ah, I have it! I remember." What the sexton remembered was that on the same wall in which the door was situated there was a large square aperture, only covered by a kind of shutter of wood, the withdrawal of a bolt from which would cause it to fall in a moment on its hinges. The sexton knew the place well, and drawing back on the somewhat rusty bolt, down went the shutter, and a broad flood of moonlight fell at once upon the corpse. "Ah!" said Will Stevens, "there it is, sure enough. What a long, odd-looking fellow, to be sure, and what a face! How thin and careworn looking! I do very much wonder now who he really is." As he continued to gaze upon the dead body, his eyes wandered to the hands, and then, sure enough, he saw the bright and glittering gems the men had spoken of, and which the salt water had not been able to tarnish into dimness. Perceiving that the setting was gold, and the stones real, "Ahem!" said Stevens softly. "They will not bury the corpse with those rings on his fingers." "Why, he must have half a dozen on at least. They will be somebody's perquisite, of course, and that somebody won't be me. The idea of leaving such property unprotected in a bone house!" Will Stevens remained now silent for a short time, moving his head about in different directions, so that he caught the bright colors of the jewels that adorned the dead man's hands, and then he spoke again. "What's more easy," said he, "than for some of the very fellows who brought him here to slip back quietly and take away every one of those rings?" After this much, he went to the door of the bone house and listened, but all was perfectly still, and then his cogitations assumed another shape. "Who saw me come from my house?" he said. "Nobody. Who will see me go back to it? Nobody. Then what is to hinder me from taking the rings, and letting the blame lie on someone else's shoulders, I should like to know? Nothing will be easier than for me to say in the morning that, owing to the strange and insolent manner in which the information was given me of the arrival of the dead body in the bone house, I did not believe it, and therefore did not rise. And so I think I may as well, eh?" He thought he heard something like a faint sigh, and the teeth chattered in his head, and he shook in every limb as he bent all his energies to the task of listening if there were really any one in or at hand playing the spy upon him. All was as before profoundly still, and with a long breath of relief he cast off his terror. "What a fool I am, to be sure!" he said. "It was but the wind, after all, no doubt, making its way through some one of the numerous chinks and crevices in the shed. It did sound like a sigh from some human lips, but it wasn't." The propriety of making short work of the affair, if he wished to do it at all, now came forcibly to the mind of the sexton, and arming himself with all the courage he could just then summon to his aid, he advanced close to the corpse. Kneeling on one knee, he took up one of the hands from which he wished to take the rings, and when he saw them closer, he felt convinced that they did not belie their appearance, but were in reality what they seemed to be, jewels of rarity and price. The hand was cold and clammy and damp to the touch, and the knuckles were swollen, so that there was great difficulty in getting the rings over them, and the sexton was full 5 minutes getting one of them off. When he had done so, he wiped the perspiration of fear and excitement from his brow, as he muttered, "That's always the case with your drowned folks. They are so swelled when they first come out of the water, and so I shall have quite a job, I suppose." The sexton's cupidity was, however, now sufficiently awakened to make him persevere, despite any such obstacles in what he was about, and accordingly, kneeling on both knees, he clasped the wrist of the dead man in one hand, and with the other strove to coax off, by twisting the hoop of gold round and round, a ring that had one diamond, apparently of great value, set in it, and which the robber of the dead thought was a prize worth some trouble in the obtaining. In an instant the dead hand clasped him tight. End of chapter 199. Chapter 200 of Varney the Vampire, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Julie Bynum. Varney the Vampire, Volume 3, by Thomas Peckett PREST. Chapter 200. The Recovery. The Sexton's Fright. The Compact. What pen shall describe the abject fright of Master Will Stevens, the sexton, as the cold, clammy fingers of the supposed corpse closed upon his hand? The blood seemed to curdle at his very heart; a film spread itself before his eyes. He tried to scream, but his tongue clove to the roof of his mouth, and he could utter no sound. In good truth, he was within an ace of fainting, and it was rather a wonder that he did not go clean off. Power to withdraw his hand from the horrible grasp he had not, and there he knelt, shivering and shaking, and with his mouth wide open and the hair literally bristling upon his head. How long he and the dead man remained in this way together in silence, he knew not, but he was aroused from the state of almost frenzy in which he was by a deep sepulchral voice, the voice of the apparently dead. "What has happened?" it said. "What has happened? Is this the world which was to come?" "Mercy, help!" stammered the sexton. I am a poor man. I don't want your rings, good Mr. Ghost. Oh, 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 have mercy upon me! I implore you." The only reply was a frightful groan. The perspiration rolled down the sexton's face. "Oh, don't! Oh, pray don't! Hold me so tight!" "Now," said the dead man, "I know all. The die is cast. My fate has again spoken. Steel shall not slay me, the bullet shall kill me not, fire shall not burn me, and water will not drown, while yon bright satellite sails on twixt earth and heaven. Yes, yes, sir. Theffy At has gone forth, and I am wretched, oh, heaven, so unutterably wretched. Perhaps, good Mr. Ghost, you will let me go now? Here's your ring. I don't want to keep it. Here's the only one I took off your worshipful fingers, good Mr. Ghost." A very thin, filmy sort of cloud had been going over the moon's disk, but now had passed completely away, and such a flood of unchecked, untempered brilliancy poured in at the open window, if it might be so called of the dead house, that it became quite radiant with the silvery beams. The drowned man rose with a wild, howling cry of rage, and springing at the throat of the sexton, bore him down to the earth in an instant, and placed his knee upon his chest. "Villain!" he groaned out between clenched teeth, "you shall die, although you have made me live. There shall be one victim to the fell destroyer." The sexton thought his hour was come. "Wretch!" pursued the revived corpse, "wretch! What devil prompted you to do this most damnable deed? Speak! Speak, I say! Who are you?" "What what deed?" gasped the sexton. "The deed of restoring me to life, of dragging me from the ocean, and forcing me to live again. I oh, dear! Speak! Go on!" "I didn't do anything of the sort. The truth is, I only came to to what?" "To borrow a ring of you, that's all. And the greatest calamity that has ever happened to me is your coming to life." "How came I here?" "That I can't tell, your worship. I am the sexton of this place. It's called Colburn, and is in Suffolk, and they picked your worship up at sea, and brought you here. That's all I know about it, as I hope for mercy. It can't do you any good to kill a poor fellow like me. I don't think you are a ghost, now, but some ugly, no, I mean handsome fellow, supposed only to be drowned." "Do you tell me the truth?" "As I live, and I hope your worship will let me live, I do. And here's the ring I came to borrow of you, sir, as a proof." "Of what?" "Of of of I hardly know what to say to you, sir." "If you are not the great enemy to me that I had thought you, you are a mere thief. You came to steal the jewels I had upon my fingers. Is that not the truth?" "I I rather think it is, sir." "You may save your wretched life if you like, if you promise me that you will keep all that has happened a secret, except so much of it as I shall empower you to reveal. I will spare you. But if after having so promised you break faith with me, and let your tongue wag further than I wish it, you will not live 24 hours afterwards, be assured, for I will find you out, and twist your head from your shoulders. Anything, sir! I will promise anything! I will swear, if you like!" "I heed no oaths. Consideration for your own safety will keep you silent. Rise." He took his knee off the chest of the sexton, and his hand off his throat, and then Will Stevens tremblingly rose to his feet. The idea did cross him for a moment of measuring his strength with the resuscitated man, but when he beheld the tall, bony, gaunt figure before him, he saw that he had not the shadow of a chance in a personal struggle. Moreover, he had a lively remembrance of a most vice-like pressure upon his throat, which seemed to say that the ugly stranger was by no means in an exhausted state. Upon the whole, then, the sexton was glad to have escaped so well. "You have only to say, sir, what you would have me do," he said. "Answer me first. Have you always lived here? Is this your native place?" "Oh, no, sir, I came from London, but then it's years ago." "Very well. You must say that you remember me in London as a gentleman of good repute, and you must add that you came to the bone house here, and found me reviving, and that you took measures to complete my recovery." "Yes, sir, and here is your ring. Keep it as a memento of this affair." "Many thanks, sir. Will it please you to tell me your name and condition?" "John Smith, a foreign merchant. And now tell me, minutely, how I was rescued from the ocean, or did the waves themselves give up their dead?" The sexton, who was now assured in his own mind that it was no ghost he was speaking to, entered, as far as he knew, into the story of the finding of the body, and bringing it to the bone house; but as that information was not great, he volunteered, if Mr. Smith would go with him to his cottage, to get him all the particulars. To this the other consented, and they both left the bone house together. On the short bit of road, the sexton began to think that his companion must be some madman, for ever and anon, when the moon was brightest, he saw him lift up both his arms to it, as if he were worshipping it, and at those times, too, he heard him mutter some words in a language that he did not comprehend. At length the singular being spoke in English. "Henceforth," he cried, as if quite forgetful of the presence of another, "henceforth, begone remorse, begone despair! The great sea has rejected me, and not again will I seek destruction. I will live, and I will live to be the bane and curse of the beautiful." "Sir," said the sexton, "here is my house, sir. If you will step in, I will soon dish you up a little something in the way of refreshment. You see, sir, I live alone. That is to say, an old woman who keeps my cottage in order, and waits upon me, goes away at night, and comes again in the morning. But as it is not her time yet, I will get you anything you like to eat or to drink." "I never eat nor drink." "Not eat nor drink, never, sir?" "Never. I shall cost you nothing to entertain me. I want some rest, and while I am taking it, do you go and get me such information as you can regarding me. Make no concealment that I am alive, but go at once, and return with what expedition you may, and remember that your fate is in my hands." "I will, sir." The sexton was quite terrified enough to do what he was bidden, and perhaps the consciousness that the strange and mysterious man whom he had for a guest might accuse him of the projected robbery of the jewelry he had about his person influenced him more than the rather obscure threat of personal vengeance by the promised screwing his head off. But the matter, take it for all in all, was anything but an agreeable one for Master Will Stevens, and most heartily did he wish he had remained in his bed, and left the stranger to recover, if it was to recover, by himself. Will did not attribute that recovery to the moonlight he had himself let in. End of chapter 200. Chapter 201 of Varney the Vampire, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Julie Bynum. Varney the Vampire, Volume 3, by Thomas Peckett PREST. Chapter 201. The Night Alarm. The Vampire's Attack upon the Bride. The particulars concerning the bringing of the body that had been picked up at sea by the brothers Edwin and Charles Crofton were to be learnt from many mouths so soon as the sexton evinced a disposition to know them, and in a very short time, and as the daylight was making the fainter and more spiritual light of the moon fade away, he again reached his own abode, where he had left a guest of whom the reader knows much, but of whom Will Stevens knew but little. He found the self-christened Mr. Smith waiting for him rather impatiently. "Well," he cried, "your news, your news!" "May be told, sir, in a few words," replied the sexton, and then he made his new friend acquainted with the whole story, just as he had heard it of the fisherman on the coast. Mr. Smith, or as we may well call him at once the Vampire, hesitated for a few moments, as if he had not exactly and accurately made up his mind what to do, and then he said, "You will go to the Grange house, and tell the story that I have before informed you I would have told. Be sure that you expatiate upon my gentility and respectability, for I want to be upon good terms with the Crofton family." "Well, but, sir, I'm a tenant of Sir George Crofton's, and so you see—" "What?" said the Vampire, his eyes flashing with indignation as he spoke. "Dare you dispute my positive commands?" "No, sir. I only—" "Peace, caitiff! And know that I hold thy life in my hands for your attempted robbery of me." The sexton trembled. That was indeed the weak point, now, of all his defences against whatever commands might be put upon him by his master, as we may now call the Vampire, although after all it was but the usual dominion of a strong mind over a weak one, for there was not so much in reality for the sexton to be afraid of as his own guilty conscience dictated to him. It were easy enough for the Vampire to charge him with robbery, but not at all so easy for him to prove such a charge, and at the same time to substantiate, as by some inquisitive counsel he might be called upon to do, his own position in society. But it is most true. Conscience doth make cowards of us all, and feeling that his intention regarding the rings of the supposed drowned man had been of a dishonest character, he could not summon courage sufficient to defy him now. "I will go," he said. "I am going. 'Tis well." In far from the pleasantest train of thought, the sexton went to the Grange and asked to see Mr. Charles Crofton, and to him he related the version of the resuscitating of the supposed drowned man. It was heard with, as might be expected, the most profound astonishment, and the sexton soon found himself confronted with the whole assembled family, and forced to repeat the wonderful facts over again. It seemed, as indeed it might well do, a something quite beyond belief. "Why, Edwin," said Charles, "he must have been in the water far beyond the length of time that it mostly takes to drown any one before we saw him." "I think so too." "It must be so, for this reason, that he was a considerable distance from land, and there was no vessel near enough for him to have come from." "Hold," said Sir George Crofton, "my dear boys, you are forgetting the most important fact of all." "Are we, father?" "Yes, and that is that the gentleman is alive. You cannot get over that, you know, and as I have often heard that whatever is natural, why, there's no disputing any more about it. And besides, how do we know but that he was in some boat which was swamped a few minutes before you saw him?" "That is a most rational supposition," said Edwin. "And that we can say nothing against," added Charles. "What is to be done, father?" "Why, do not let us do good by inches. We know that this is the only decent house within a considerable distance for a gentleman to remain in, if he have the habits of comfort about him. So, Master Stephen, if you will go and give our compliments to the stranger, and ask him to come here, I shall be much obliged to you." "I will, Sir George. And you can tell him that we are plain folks, but assure him of a hearty welcome." Will Stevens made his bow and exit. "Well," said Edwin, "it's very odd, although of course it must be all right, and I am the last person who would wish to make anything out of a commonplace event, but to all appearances dead he was when we took him into the boat, and I never before heard of a spontaneous recovery like this from such a state." "Then you have added to your stock of experience," said his father, laughing; "and I must own, for my own part, that I am rather curious to see this person, who was a curiosity in appearance, according to your accounts, when he was dead, or supposed to be dead." "He was so," remarked Charles, "for I am certain you might travel the world over without meeting a more singular-looking man than he was. In the first place, he looked particularly tall, but that might have arisen from the fact that we only saw him in a horizontal position. And then there was something about the expression of his face which was perfectly indescribable, and yet at the same time filled you with feelings of curiosity and dread." The sisters heard this account of the mysterious stranger with feelings of great interest. "Why," said Emma, "we have all of us often complained of being dull here, but such an animal as this will be quite an acquisition." "And just as Clara is going, too! What a pity!" laughed Edwin. "I shall endeavor to survive the horrid disappointment," said Clara, for she was to be married on that day, to one who had been the chosen companion of her heart for many a day, and was to leave the home of her childhood to proceed far away to his house in Wales, where she was to be the light of joy to another admiring and loving circle. "Ah, well, I pity you," said Emma. "Then you had better at once," remarked Clara, "forbid the occasional visits here of a certain young officer who, I'm afraid, has some audacious intentions." The ready color flushed to the cheek of the younger sister, who had scarcely expected such a retort, although she had fairly provoked it. "Come, girls," said the father, "we will have no more lance breaking between you about your lovers." "Certainly not, father," said Clara; "but then you know, unless Emma is made to see that she is vulnerable, she will go on tormenting me." "In other words, Emma," said Edwin, "you see that people who live in glass houses should not throw stones, a most useful maxim." "I don't care for any of you," said Emma, half crying, as she ran out of the room. Clara followed her, for there was really the very best understanding and the kindest feeling between the two young girls, although occasionally a smart repartee would be uttered upon some such occasion as the present, but all that was soon forgotten. The sexton, who was getting each moment more and more uneasy about the share he had in the affair of the resuscitated man of the bone house, went back to the cottage, and there informed the self-named Mr. Smith of the success of his mission to the Grange house. "You think they will welcome me?" said the Vampire. "I am sure of it, sir. They are the frankest, freest family I ever knew, and they would not have asked you to go to the Grange if they did not mean to use you well." "And there are two daughters?" "Yes, sir." "And young and fair, you tell me?" "They are two as handsome girls as you will find in this part of the country, sir. They have always been much admired. One of them, as I before mentioned, is going to be married and taken away, but the other stays at home." "'Tis well. Not you will not fail to remember the awkward situation in which you are. Keep the ring which you took from my finger, and with it keep your own counsel, for any babbling upon your part will most assuredly lead to your destruction." "Yes, sir, I know. And although that destruction might not be immediate, you would lead a life of trembling terror until your doom was accomplished, and that doom should be a dreadful one in its manner. Now farewell, farewell, and remember me." "I shall never forget you the longest day I have got to live," said the sexton, with a shudder, as he saw the tall, angular, gaunt-looking form of his most mysterious new acquaintance leave his cottage, and make his way toward the Grange. End of chapter 201.
Chapter 202 of Varney the Vampire, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Donald Finch. Varney the Vampire, Volume 3, by Peckett PREST. Chapter 202. The Defile in the Rocks, the Horseman, and the Accident. The Grange house was visible from the cottage of the sexton, and so the vampire had declined the offer of Will Stevens to be his guide. As it happened, though, it would have been better regarded his reaching the Grange quickly that he should have taken the sexton with him, for the cliffs that were close at hand concealed to the eye many deep gullies and frightful precipices that had to be coasted round before anyone could reach the Grange house by that route. If he could have gone directly onward, about half a mile's walking would have sufficed to enable him to reach the place. But before he had proceeded a quarter of that distance, he came upon a deep ravine or splitting in the cliff, too wide to jump across, and with all the appearances of extending inland a considerable distance without narrowing. "I had indeed better have brought a guide with me," muttered Varney. He then paused for a few moments, as if he was debating with himself whether or not he should return back and get the sexton. But the mental hesitation did not last long, and accustomed as he was to trust to his own sagacity and his own resources more than to other people, he walked along by the side of the fissure in the cliff, muttering to himself, "Were all the guides in the country here, they could but do as I am doing, namely, walk on until the ravine closes." With this idea he pursued it, but to his mortification he found that it widened instead of presenting the least symptoms of closing, and suddenly it opened to his eyes to a width of about 50 feet, and he paused again, irresolute. "How am I to proceed?" he said. "This is a perplexity." He advanced close to the brink and looked down. The depth was very considerable, and at the bottom there was evidently a road made of sand and chalk, which wound down somewhere from the interior of the country to the sea beach. As he looked, he heard the rapid sound of a horse's feet. In another moment there dashed down the road towards the sea a horse bearing on his back a man, who was exerting himself in every possible way to stop the maddened, headlong career of the animal, but it would not be checked. With starting eyes and dilated nostrils, and with its flanks covered with foam, the frightened steed, which had evidently come some distance in that state, rushed on, but the broken nature of the ground made it almost impossible that it should make such great speed and as it had been making, at least with any degree of safety. This was what occurred to the thoughts of Varney, and it was sufficiently proved to be a correct idea by the horse stumbling the next moment, and throwing his rider heavily upon the sand and broken rock that was strewn around. The steed, now disencumbered of its load, recovered itself in a moment, and with a snort of rage, and probably of pain likewise, dashed and disappeared from sight, round the abrupt corner of the ravine, to the left hand of the beach. "So be it," said the vampire calmly. "Another being is snatched away from the muster roll of the living, one who perhaps would gladly have preserved his existence, while I remain and cannot. Let me do what I will to accomplish such a purpose, shake off the cumbrous load of life that will cling to me." Suddenly, quite a whirlwind of passion seemed to come on him, and, standing on the brink of the ravine with his arms extended, he cried, "Since death is denied me, I will henceforth shake off all human sympathies. Since I am compelled to be that which I am, I will not be that, and likewise suffer all the pangs of doing deeds at which a better nature that was within me revolted. No! I will from this time be the bane of all that is good and great and beautiful. If I am forced to wander upon the earth, a thing to be abhorred and accursed among men, I will perform my mission to the very letter, as well as the spirit, and henceforth adieu all regrets, adieu all feeling, all memory of goodness, of charity, to human nature, for I will be a dread and a desolation. Since blood is to be my only sustenance, and since death is denied to me, I will have abundance of it. I will revel in it, and no spark of human pity shall find a home in this once racked and tortured bosom. Fate, I thee defy!" He continued for some few moments after uttering this speech in the same attitude in which he had spoken the words. Then, suffering his hands slowly to fall, again he looked cold and passionless, as he had been before, but his determination was made. By looking carefully about him, he saw that there was a kind of footpath down the side of the ravine, which an active person might descend by, although probably not altogether without some risk, for the least false step might precipitate him to the bottom. The vampire, however, had no such fears. He seemed to feel that he possessed a kind of charmed life, and that he might adventure to do what others might well shrink from. This feeling begot a confidence which was almost certain to be his protection, even if it had been only founded upon imagination, for it fortified his nerves, and when he began the descent down the side of the ravine, it was without the smallest terror. He found, however, that when he was fairly on the path, it was a better and a wider one than he had at first supposed it to be, and in the course of 5 minutes he had got completely down to the narrow road on which, apparently dead, lay the wounded man, for he was only grievously hurt by his fall, although he was quite insensible. The vampire strode up to him. "Ah," he said, "young and what the world would call handsome. Ha! Ha! Heaven takes but little care sometimes of its handiwork." After a few moments' contemplation of the still form that lay at his feet, he knelt on one knee by its side, and placed his hand upon the region of the heart, after roughly tearing open the vest of the stranger. "He lives. He lives. Well, shall I crush the fluttering spirit that now is hovering twixt life and death, or shall I let it linger while it may within its earthly prison? Let it stay. The worst turn that anyone can do another in this world is surely to preserve existence after once the pang of what would be all the agony of death is past." The vampire rose, and was moving away up the ravine, when a sudden thought seemed to strike him, and he turned back again. "Gold," he said, "is always useful to me, and I think with my new thoughts and feelings it will now be more so than ever. This insensible man may have some about him." Again he knelt by the side of the young man, and soon possessed himself of a tolerably well-stocked purse that he found upon him. Round his neck, too, by a thin chain of gold, hung a small portrait of a young and beautiful girl, upon which Varney gazed intently. "She is fair," he said, "very fair. She would make a fit victim for me. I will take this portrait. It might stand me in some stead should I encounter the original." He placed the portrait in his pocket, and was in the act of rising when he heard the sound of a footstep. "Ah, someone comes. It will be no part of my plan to have been seen by the body." He darted forth down the narrow gorge or ravine, and was soon sufficiently hidden from the sight of those who were advancing. They proved to be some fishermen going to spread their nets upon the beach, which just below the spot where the seemingly fatal accident had taken place was as level as a carpet, screened from the wind, and composed of the finest sand. Of course it was impossible to avoid seeing the body that lay in their path, and Varney had no need to be fearful that he would be seen, when an object of so much greater and more absorbing interest lay in their direct and unavoidable path. He heard from the sudden exclamations that fell from them that they had seen the body, and upon advancing a step or two he found that they were collected round it in a dense throng, for there were about a dozen men in all. "'Tis well," said Varney. "It matters not to me if he be living or dead. I can doubtless find my way to the Grange house by this path along the shore. I will pursue it at all events, and see whither it will lead me." He did so, and after going about half a mile he found another ravine, which, upon entering and ascending for a time, led him quite close to one of the entrances of the Grange house, as it was called, and which he was so anxious to reach. End of chapter 202. Recording by Donald Finch. dafinch.com. Chapter 203 of Varney the Vampire, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Donald Finch. Varney the Vampire, Volume 3, by Peckett PREST. Chapter 203. The disappointment at the Grange, the news of despair, the finding of the body. It was a fine old place, the Grange, view it from what aspect you might, and had not the mind of Varney the Vampire been so fearfully irritated by the circumstances of his horrible existence, he must have paused to admire it. It was one of those ancient English edifices which, alas, are fast disappearing from the face of once merry England. Railways have gone tearing and screaming through the old parks and shady glens. Alas, all is altered now, and for the sake of getting to some abominable place such as Manchester or Birmingham in a very short space of time, many a lonely spot of nature's own creating is marred by noise and smoke. "So," said Varney, "this then is the home of these young men who have done me such an injury as to rescue me from the sea." He ground his teeth together as he spoke, and it was quite clear that he felt disposed to consider that a most deadly injury had been done to him by Edwin and Charles Crofton, who had only followed the proper dictates of humanity in rescuing him from the waves. "It shall go hard with me," added Varney, "but I will teach such meddling fools to leave the great sea in charge of its dead. Oh, had I but been allowed to remain until now, which but for these officious persons might still have been the case, I should have sunk deep, deep into the yellow sands, and there rotted." His passion as he uttered these words had in it something fearful, but in a few moments the external symptoms of it passed away, and he walked slowly, and to all appearance calmly enough, towards the Grange. The distance he had to go was still as before a deceiving one, for he had to wind round a clump of trees before he really got to the gate, which appeared to be just in sight, but at length he reached it, and paused as he saw an old man who was a kind of warder there. "Is this Sir George Crofton's?" he said, and he threw into his voice all that silvery softness which at times had been so fascinating to the Bannerworth family. "It is, sir." "Will you announce me?" "I do not leave this gate, sir, but if you go down this avenue you will reach the mansion, and some of the servants will attend to you." Varney walked on. The avenue was one formed by two stately rows of chestnuts, the spreading branches of which met overhead, forming a beautiful canopy, and notwithstanding that they were so near the sea, that foe to vegetation, these trees were in good truth most luxuriantly beautiful. "There was a time," muttered Varney, "when I should have admired such a spot as this, but all that is long since passed away. I am that which I am." He now arrived in front of the house itself, and being perceived by one of the domestics, he was politely asked what he wanted. "Say that Mr. Smith is here," was the message that Varney gave. The servant had already heard that such was the name of the person who had been rescued from the sea by his young masters, Edwin and Charles. He now hastened with the information to the drawing room, where the family was assembled. "Oh, if you please, sir, he has come." "Who has come?" "The drowned man, Mr. Smith." "Admit him instantly." The servant ran back to Varney, and then politely ushered him into the large, really handsome room, in which the family sat awaiting his arrival, with no small share of curiosity. What the sexton had said of him had excited much speculation, and the eagerness to see a man who was, as it were, a present from the sea was extreme. "Mr. Smith," announced the servant, and Varney, with one of his courtly bows, and a smile that was half hideous, half charming, entered. There was a decided effect produced by his appearance, and perhaps that effect is best described by the word awe. They all seemed as if they were in the presence of something very peculiar, if not something very superior. Sir George Crofton broke the rather awkward silence that ensued by addressing his visitor with all the frankness that was part of his nature. "Sir," he said, "I am glad to see you, and hope you will make yourself as much at home as if you were in a house of your own." "Sir," said Varney, "you know how much I owe your family already, and I fear to increase the heavy debt of gratitude." "Oh, you are welcome, most welcome. Stay here as long as you like. We are rather dull at times in this isolated house, and the arrival of an intelligent guest is always an event." Varney bowed, and Edwin advanced. "Mr. Smith," he said, "I suppose I may almost call myself an old acquaintance." "And I," said Charles. "Gentlemen, if you be those to whom I am indebted for my preservation, I owe you my warmest thanks." "Oh, think nothing of it," said Sir George. "It was not at all likely that my two boys would see a fellow creature in such a situation, and not, dead or alive, take possession of him. Your recovery is the only remarkable thing in the whole affair." "Very remarkable," said Varney. They waited a moment, as if he was expected to make some sort of explanation of that part of the business, but as he did not, Sir George said, "You have no idea how you became resuscitated?" Not the least. Well, that is strange indeed. Perhaps the good fellow who afforded me immediate shelter applied before that some means of recovering suspended vitality. Oh no, Will Stevens is to the full as much surprised as anyone. But however, I dare say to you, sir, that is not the most entertaining subject in the world, so we will say no more about it, except that we are very glad to have a living guest instead of a dead one. I much fear, from what I have heard, said Varney, that I shall be intruding at a time like this into your family circle. Oh, you allude to the marriage today of one of my daughters, and that puts me in mind of really quite an omission on my part, Mr. Smith. My daughters, Clara and Emma. The vampire bowed low, and the young ladies went with established grace through the ceremony of the introduction to the remarkable personage before them. At this moment there came upon the ears of all assembled there the sound of hurried footsteps, and a servant without any ceremony burst into the apartment, exclaiming, "Oh, Sir George! Oh, sir!" "What is it? Speak." "Oh, they have found him, killed in the ravine." "Who? Who?" "Mr. Ringwood, as was to be married." "My daughter!" Clara uttered a cry of despair, and sank into a chair in a state of insensibility. The scene of confusion and general consternation that now ensued baffles all description, and the only person who looked calm and collected upon the occasion was Mr. Smith, although it was not the insulting calmness of seeming indifference. In a few minutes, however, Sir George himself recovered from the first shock which the intelligence had given to him, and he said, "Where is he? Where is he? Let me to the spot." "And allow me, sir, to accompany you," said Varney. "Believe me, I feel deeply for the family misfortune. Let me be useful." "Thank you, sir, thank you. Edwin, Charles, come with me and this gentleman, and we will see if this dreadful report be true. Let us hope that fear and ignorance have exaggerated a very simple affair into so seemingly dreadful a circumstance." Leaving Clara to the care of her sister and some of the female domestics of the Grange, who were hastily summoned to attend upon her, the little party, consisting of Sir George, his two sons, Varney, and several of the men servants, turned from the Grange in the direction of the ravine. Their intimate acquaintance with all the neighbourhood enabled them to reach the place much sooner than Varney thought it possible to do, and as they came within sight of the spot where the accident had occurred, they saw a crowd of villagers and fishermen assembled. They quickened their pace, and forcing through the throng, Sir George Crofton saw his intended son-in-law, to all appearance, lying dead and bleeding on the sands. Such a sight was enough for a moment to paralyze every faculty, and it really had for a time that effect upon Sir George. End of chapter 203. Recording by Donald Finch. dafinch.com. Chapter 204 of Varney the Vampire, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Donald Finch. Varney the Vampire, Volume 3, by Peckett PREST. Chapter 204. The Sick Chamber at the Grange. The Night. "Is he dead? Is he dead?" cried Sir George. "We don't know, sir," replied one of the fishermen. "Some of us think he is, and some of us think he is not." "What is to be done?" "Have him taken at once to the Grange, father," said Charles, "and let us get medical assistance. Who knows but the affair may turn out in reality very different from what it first appeared. He may only be stunned by a fall. I hope to heaven it may be so. Can you, among you, my men, make anything like a litter to carry him on?" This was soon done. Some of the loose seats from some boats close at hand, and a rough cloak or two, made a capital couch for the dead or wounded man, as the case might be. They lifted him carefully into it, and then 4 of them lifted the rude but easy and appropriate conveyance, and carried him towards the hall. "How could this have happened?" said Sir George. "Perhaps I may be able to throw some light upon it," said Varney. "As I came here to your hospitable house, a horse without a rider, but caparisoned for one, passed me furiously." "That must have been his horse, then," said Charles. "You may depend, father, he was riding on to see Clara before the hour appointed for their marriage, and he has met with this accident. Come, there is some consolation in that. A fall from his horse is not likely to kill him. Where is Edwin?" "Oh, he went off at once for Dr. North, and no doubt he will get to the Grange about as soon as we shall." That was right, that was right. I really have been taken so much by surprise that I hardly know what I am about. It was very right of Edwin." Nothing of any importance now passed in the way of conversation, nor did any incident worth recording take place until the melancholy little procession reached the Grange, and by the advice of Varney the young bridegroom was carried direct to a bedchamber before he was removed from the litter on which he had been carried. The operation was scarcely performed, and he laid upon a bed, when Dr. North came, having mounted his horse upon hearing the information from Edwin that he was wanted in a case of such great emergency at the Grange, and ridden hard all the way. He was at once introduced to his patient, and upon a cursory examination he said, "This is a concussion of the brain, but don't let that alarm you. It may be very slight, although it certainly has an awkward sound, and a little rest and bloodletting may put him all to rights." This was to some extent cheering, and the doctor at once proceeded to bleed his patient. As the ruddy stream fell into a crystal goblet, the young man gradually opened his eyes, and looked round him with a bewildered glare. "Darken the room," said Dr. North. "He is right enough, but he must be kept quiet for a day or two, at all events." "What has happened?" said the wounded man. "Nothing particular," replied Dr. North, "nothing particular. You have had a fall from your horse." "Clara!" "Ah, I know, and now listen to me. If you remain quiet and don't speak, you will see Clara soon, but if you are willful and disobey orders, you will bring on a brain fever, and you won't see her at all in this world. So now you can judge for yourself." "You are rather harsh," said Sir George. "Pardon me, sir, I am not. There is nothing like making a patient thoroughly understand his own position, and I give this young gentleman credit for sufficient wisdom to enable him to profit by what I say to him." Mr. Ringwood nodded. "There, you see, all's right. Now he will go to sleep, and as all will depend upon the state in which he awakens, I will, if you please, wait here, unless I should be urgently sent for from home, for I have left word where I am. Pardon me, doctor, for finding any fault with you." "Don't mention it. What I said did sound harsh." Sir George went now at once to the room where his daughter Clara had been taken to, for the purpose of informing her of the hopeful state of affairs. He found her just recovered from her swoon, so that recollection had not yet sufficiently returned to give her all the agony of thinking that the news, so heedlessly and so suddenly communicated by the servant, might be true in its full intensity. "My dear, you must not distress yourself," said Sir George. "Ringwood is riding over here, it seems, to see you, and his horse getting restive has thrown him. Dr. North says there is nothing particular the matter, and that after a little rest he will recover." Clara tried to speak, but she could not. She burst into tears. "Ah," said the old nurse who was attending her, and who had been in her family many years, "ah, poor dear, she will be all right now. I was just wishing that she would have a good cry. It does anyone a world of good, it does." "What an agitating night and day this has been, to be sure," said Sir George. "First the terror of losing both my boys, then the return with the dead man, who so oddly comes to life again. Then this dreadful accident to Ringwood. Upon my word, the incidents of a whole year have been crammed into a few hours. I only hope this is the last of it." "And I shall see him again, father," sobbed Clara. "Of course you will." You have sent him home very carefully?" "Home? No. He is here under this roof, and here he shall stay till he recovers, poor lad. Oh dear no, I never thought of sending him home, but I must send some one, by the by, with the news of what has happened. This is well thought of." The knowledge that her lover and her affianced husband was doing well, and that he was under the same roof with her, gave Clara the most unalloyed satisfaction, and she recovered rapidly her good and healthful looks. It was duly explained to her that she must not go near Ringwood to disturb him, as rest was so very essential to his recovery, so she did not attempt it. The whole household was commanded to be unusually quiet, and never had the Grange before presented such a collection of creeping domestics, for they went up and down stairs like so many cats. Clara did not omit to thank Mr. Smith for the assistance he had rendered them in this evil emergency, and Dr. North stood with the family in the dining room waiting, perhaps with greater anxiety than he chose to express, the awaking of his patient. A servant was left in the adjoining chamber to that occupied by Ringwood, who was told to bring to the dining room the first intimation that the wounded man was living. About 2 hours elapsed when the servant came in with an air of affright. Dr. North sprang to his feet in a moment. "What is it? Is he awake?" "Not exactly awake, sir, but he is speaking in his sleep, and it's all about a what?" "A vampire." "Stuff! "Well, sir, he's having some horrid dream, I can tell you. And he said, 'Keep off the vampire! Save her! Oh, save her from the vampire!'" "How singular," said Varney. "What an absurd belief that is! A vampire! What on earth could have put such a thing in his head, I wonder?" "I will go to him," said Dr. North. "If he should be very much disturbed, perhaps I shall think it preferable to awake him. But I can inform you all that such dreams show that there is much excitement going on in the brain." "Then you do not consider the symptom favorable, doctor?" "Certainly not. Quite the reverse of favorable." Dr. North rose, and as Varney offered very politely to accompany him, he made no sort of objection, and they proceeded to the chamber of the bridegroom. During the time that the doctor had been in the society of Varney, he had been much pleased with him, for he found that he possessed a vast store of knowledge upon almost any subject that could be touched upon, besides no small amount of skill and theoretical information upon medical matters. So he let him come with him, when perhaps he would have objected to any one else. Varney the Vampire could fascinate when he liked. When they reached the chamber, the young man was quiet, but in a few minutes he began to toss about his head and mutter in his sleep, "The vampire! The dreadful vampire! Oh, save her! Help! Help! Help!" "This won't do," said the doctor. He went to the toilette table, and procuring a large towel, he soaked it well in cold water, and then wrapped it round the head of Ringwood, and so carefully as not to arouse him. The effect was almost instantaneous. The vexed sleeper relapsed into a much easier attitude. The breathing was more regular, and the distressing fancies that had tortured his fevered brain were chased away. "A simple plan," said Varney. "Yes, but a most efficacious one." End of chapter 204. Recording by Donald Finch. dafinch.com.
Chapter 205 of Varney the Vampire, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Varney the Vampire, Volume 3, by Thomas Peckett PREST. Chapter 205. A Midnight Alarm, the Chase, the Mystery. Young Ringwood did awaken about 2 hours afterwards, and the state he was in, although not such as to create alarm, was not pleasing to Dr. North. That gentleman desired that he should be carefully watched and kept quiet, while he went to his own house for some medicines. He returned as soon as he possibly could, and administered such remedies as he considered the urgency of the case required, and having, as he always made a practice of doing, left word at his own house where he was, he offered to remain at the Grange the whole of the night. It was scarcely necessary to say that such an offer was most gratefully accepted. Clara was profuse in her acknowledgments of the doctor's kindness, and they all passed the evening together in the large dining room, to which Varney was first introduced. Not, however, for a long time had so gloomy an evening been passed at the Grange as that. Nobody was in spirits, and although there was a great deal of conversation, it somehow assumed always a very sombre shape, let it commence on what subject it might. 10:30 o'clock was the usual hour at which the family retired for the night, and it was quite a relief to every one when that hour came, and Sir George ordered lights for the bedchambers. Clara, indeed, being much oppressed, had retired some time before, and so had Emma, so that there were none but gentlemen in the dining room at 10:30. "I have ordered a bed to be prepared for you close to your patients," said Sir George to Dr. North. "Oh, thank you, but I shall only lie down in my clothes, a couch would have done just as well, I am used to sitting up all night upon occasion." "No doubt, but I hope you will not be disturbed, and that tomorrow morning we shall have a better account of your patient." "I hope so too. A good calm night's rest may do much." "You speak doubtingly." "Why, in these cases it is difficult to know the extent of injury. There is no fracture of the skull, but it is as yet impossible to say what amount of shaking he has had." "Well, we can but hope for the best. Mr. Smith, although we retire at this early hour, there is no sort of occasion for you to do so. Order what wines you please, and sit as long as you please." "By no means, Sir George. I am a great patron of early hours myself." Varney was shown into a bedroom which was upon the same floor with those of the family, and which formed one of a range of chambers, all opening from a corridor that ran the entire length of the house, and which in the daytime was lighted by a very large, handsome window at one end, while at the other was a broad flight of stairs ascending from the lower part of the house. The sisters occupied contiguous chambers, and then there was an empty room, and next to that again was the bedroom in which was Ringwood, and then Dr. North's. Exactly opposite was Varney's room, and close at hand slept the sons, while Sir George himself occupied a room at the furthest corner of the corridor. Emma made Clara an offer to sleep with her that night, as she was in grief and anxiety, but this Clara would not permit, for she could not think of sacrificing her sister's repose to attend upon her. "No, Emma," she said, "I will hope for the best, and strive to rest." They bade each other affectionately good night, and shortly afterwards retired to their separate apartments. By 11 o'clock all was still in the house. Dr. North had begged a book from the library, for he thought it likely enough that he should not be able to get much repose, and with that he sat in his room, the only one, as he thought, in all the house who was not in bed. He continued reading for about an hour, and then after visiting his patient, and finding him asleep, he thought it would be just as well for him to pull off his boots and his coat, and lie down on the bed to snatch a few hours' sleep. He performed all the operations but the final one, the sleeping, for scarcely had he lain down, when he heard a soft sliding sort of noise close to the room door, he thought, and he sprung up in a sitting posture to listen to it. "Who's there?" he cried. There was no answer, and jumping off his bed, he took the light which he had not put out, and opened his door. All was deserted and still in the corridor. "Imagination, or some accidental noise that I am not familiar with," said the doctor as he closed his door again. Down he laid himself, and he was just upon the point of getting to sleep, when he heard a scratching sound, as he thought, upon the very panel of the door of his room. Up he sprang again, and this time without the delay of asking who was there. He opened his door, and looked out into the corridor, holding the light above his head so as to diffuse its rays as much as possible, but he saw no one, and all the other doors were close shut. "A plague take it," he said. "I may keep myself at this sort of thing all night, if I am foolish enough. It is a cat, perhaps, for all I know. However it may scratch away, I won't move again." Shutting the door, he lay down, now fully determined that he would not move, unless something very much out of the common way, indeed, should take place. Again he started. There was a curious sound about the lock of his door, and he listened intently. "Now, what on earth can that be?" All was still, and he nearly dropped asleep. Twice, however, he thought he heard the sound again, but he would not move, and in a few minutes more he was enjoying a sound repose. How long this repose lasted he had no means of telling, for he was suddenly awakened by such a cry, that at first he lay overpowered completely by it, and unable to move. It was a loud shrieking cry, such as might come from any one in a most dreadful agony. "Good heaven!" he cried, "what's that?" Now, Dr. North was not a fearful man, nor a nervous one, and he soon recovered. Besides, such a cry as that, he knew very well, must have the effect of arousing everybody in the house, so he sprung out of his bed and rushed to the door. It was fast. In vain he tried the lock, and hammered at it and pushed. The door was a thick and heavy one, and it was quite clear he was a prisoner. This was serious, and he cried out, "Help! Help! Here, undo the door! Undo the door! Who has locked me in?" He heard the scraping of feet, the sound of voices, the ringing of bells, and all the symptoms of a suddenly disturbed and alarmed household, but nobody paid any attention to him. He dragged on his boots, in order that he might be able to keep up a constant kicking on the lower part of his door, and he did keep it up with a vengeance. At length he heard voices close to his door, and someone cried, "Open the door, sir! Open the door!" "Open it yourself," said Dr. North. "You have fastened it on the outside, I suppose." There was some further running about, and then with a crash the door was forced open with a crowbar, and upon emerging from the apartment, the doctor found assembled in the corridor the whole family, with the exception of the 2 girls, and several servants half dressed bearing lights. "What's the matter?" cried Sir George. "What's the matter?" "Ah," the doctor said, "that's what I want to know." "Yes, why, you made all the disturbance." "I beg your pardon, there was a scream came from somewhere, and when I tried to come out to find what it was, my room door was fast. That's all I know about it." Bang, 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 came now a sound. Bang, 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 and all eyes were turned in the direction of the chamber occupied by Mr. Smith, and they heard his voice from within, shouting in loud and frightened tones. "Help! Help! Is it fire? Open my door! Help! Help! Do you lock in your guests here? Help!" "Why, God bless me," said Dr. North, "that gentleman is locked in likewise." "But it can't be," said Sir George, "for all the keys of these doors are in the library in a drawer. The fact is, we none of us fasten up our bedrooms, and the keys were all removed years ago." "Help! Help! Help!" cried Mr. Smith. "Break the door open," said Sir George. "This is inexplicable to me. I cannot make it out in the least." The same crowbar that had been brought by one of the servants to bear upon the door of Dr. North's room was now applied to that of Mr. Smith, and it soon yielded to the force of the lever that was used with strength and judgment. Mr. Smith, partially dressed and with a rather terrified look, emerged. "Good God!" he said. "I wish you wouldn't lock me in. What has happened? I heard a shriek that woke me up, as if the last trumpet had sounded." "My daughters. Are they safe?" cried Sir George. He flew to the door of Clara's room. It yielded to his touch. "Clara! Clara!" he called. "I am paralyzed," said Dr. North, "and so are you, sir. Come in." He seized a light from one of the servants, and with a presentiment that there was to be found a solution of, at all events, the mystery of the dreadful shriek that had alarmed all the house, he dashed into the chamber of the young girl, followed by the father. Chapter 206 of Varney the Vampire, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Varney the Vampire, Volume 3, by Thomas Peckett PREST. Chapter 206. The Sight of Terror, the Doctor's Suspicions, the Night Watch. The sight that met the eyes of the father in his daughter's chamber was, indeed, one calculated in every respect to strike him with horror and misery. Emma was lying insensible at the side of the bed, and Clara seemed to be dead, for she was ghastly pale, and there was blood upon her neck. The father staggered to a seat, but Dr. North at once rushed forward, and held the light to the eyes of Clara, at the same time that he placed his finger on her wrist to note if there was any pulsation. "Only a fainting fit," he said. "But the blood, the blood!" cried Sir George. "That I know nothing about just at present, but let us see what's the matter here." He raised Emma from the floor, and found that she too had fainted, but as she appeared to be perfectly uninjured. She slightly recovered as he lifted her up, and he resigned her at once to the care of some of the female servants, who now made their appearance in the chamber, all terribly alarmed at the shriek that had awakened them. "This is strange," said Dr. North. "Here is a small puncture upon the throat of your daughter Clara, that almost looks like the mark of a tooth." "A tooth!" "Yes, but of course that cannot be." "Hear me, oh, hear me!" cried Emma at this moment. "Horror! Horror!" "What would you say? Speak at once, and clear up this mystery if you can. What has happened?" "I heard a noise, and came from my own chamber to this. There was some one bending over the bed. 'Twas I who shrieked." "You?" "Yes, oh yes, 'twas I. I know not what then happened, for I either fell or was struck down, and I felt that my senses left me. What has happened? I too ask. Oh, Clara, what was it? What was it?" "Imagination, most likely," said the doctor. "You had better go to your room again, Miss Emma, for you are trembling with cold and apprehension. Perhaps in the morning all this affair will assume a different shape. At present we are all too much flurried to take proper cognizance of it. There, your sister is rapidly recovering. How do you feel now, Miss Clara?" I am mad." "Oh, nonsense." "Oh, God help me! How horrifying! How more than dreadful! That awful face! Those hideous teeth! I am mad! I am mad!" "Why, my dear child, you will drive me mad," cried Sir George, "if you talk in such a strain. Oh, let me beg of you not." "Don't heed her," said Dr. North. "This will soon pass away. Come, Miss Clara, you must tell me freely, as your medical man, what has happened. Let us hear the full particulars, and then you know well that if any human means can aid you, you shall be aided." This calm mode of discourse had evidently a great effect upon her, and after the silence of a few moments, she spoke much more collectedly than before, saying, "Oh, no, no, I cannot think it was a dream." "What a dream?" You shall hear. But do not drag me from my home, and from all I love, if I am mad. I pray you do not. I implore you." "You are quite safe. Why, what a ridiculous girl you are, to be sure! Nobody wants to drag you from your home, and nobody will attempt such a thing, I assure you. You have only to tell us all, unreservedly, and you will then be quite safe. If you refuse us your confidence, how can we act for you in any way?" This argument seemed to be effective, and to reach her understanding quite, so that after a shudder and a glance around her of great dread and dismay, she spoke, saying in a low, faltering voice, "Something came, something not quite human, yet having the aspect of a man, something that flew at me, and fastened its teeth upon my neck." "Teeth! Everybody says teeth!" exclaimed the father. "Hush!" said the doctor, with an admonitory wave of his hand. "Keep that a secret from her, whatever you do. I implore you, keep quiet on that head. Well, is that all, Clara?" "Yes, yes." "Then it was a dream, and nothing else, I can assure you. Nothing but a dream. Make yourself comfortable, and think no more of it. I dare say you will have a quiet sleep now, after this. But you had better let your sister Emma lay with you, as your nerves are a little shattered." "Oh, yes, yes." Emma, who, truth to tell, was very little better than her sister, professed her readiness to stay, and the doctor giving Sir George a nod, as much to say, let no more be said about it just now, led the way from the room at once. When he reached the corridor, where Varney and the two sons were waiting, he said, "We shall none of us after this, I am certain, feel inclined to sleep. Suppose we go downstairs at once, and think and talk this matter over together. There is more in it, perhaps, than meets the eye. I will follow you in a moment, when I have just seen that my patient is all right." They all proceeded downstairs to the dining room, and, in a few minutes, the doctor followed. Lights were procured, and they sat down, all looking at the doctor who had taken the lead in the affair, and who evidently had some very disagreeable, if not very true, ideas upon the subject matter of the evening's disturbance. "Well, doctor," said Sir George, "we rely upon you to give us your opinion upon this business, and some insight into its meaning." "In the first place, then," said the doctor, "I don't understand it." "Well, that's coming to the point." "Stop a bit, it was no dream." "You think not." "Certainly not a dream. Two people don't dream of the same thing at the same time. I don't of course deny the possibility of such a thing, but it is too remarkable a coincidence to believe all at once. But Emma avows that she saw a somebody in her sister's room." "Ah," said Sir George, "she did. I had in my confusion forgotten that horrible confirmation of Clara's story. She did so, and before Clara was well recovered, too, so that she could not have put the idea into her head. Good God, what am I to think? For the love of heaven, some of you tell me what are your opinions upon this horrible affair, which looks so romantically unreal, and yet so horribly real. All except the doctor looked at each other in surprise. Well, he said, I will tell you what the thing suggests. Not what it is, mind you, for the affair to me is too out of the way of natural causes to induce me to come to a positive conclusion. Before I speak, however, I should like to have your opinion, Mr. Smith. I am convinced it will be valuable. Really, I have formed none, replied Varney. I am only exceedingly surprised that somebody should have fastened me in my bedroom. I know that circumstance gave me a terrible fright, for when I heard all the outcry and confusion, I thought the house was on fire. Ah, the locking of us in our rooms, too, said the doctor. There's another bit of reality. Who did that? It puzzles me beyond all comprehension, said Sir George. How the doors could be locked I cannot imagine, for as I told you, the keys are in a drawer in my library. At all events, the doors could not lock themselves, with or without keys, said Charles, and that circumstance shows sufficiently evidently that someone has been at work in the business whom we have still to discover. True, said Mr. Smith. Well, gentlemen, added the doctor, I will tell you what I suggest, and that is contained in a letter, written a long while ago by a distant relation of mine, likewise a surgeon. Mind, I do not of course pledge myself at the present time, for the truth and accuracy of a man who was dead long before I was born. He might, too, have been a very superstitious man. But what did he suggest? He did more than suggest. He wrote for a medical publication of that day an account, only of course suppressing names, of the appearance of a vampire. A what? A vampire? I have heard of such horrors, said Mr. Smith, but really at the present day no one can think of believing such things. Vampires indeed! No, that is too great a claim upon one's credulity. These existences, or supposed existences, have gone the same way as the ghosts, and so on. One would think so, but you shall hear. Sir George Crofton and his sons looked curious, and thought that the doctor was going to draw upon his memory in the matter to which he alluded, but he took from his pocket a memorandum book, and from it extracted some printed papers. The communication was so curious, he said, that I cut it out of the old volume in which it appeared, and kept it ever since. Pray, said Mr. Smith, what was the name of your distant relation, the medical man? Chillingworth. Oh, indeed, an odd name rather. I don't recollect ever hearing of it. No, sir, it is not likely you should. Dr. Chillingworth has been dead many years, and no one else of his name is at present in the medical profession to my knowledge. But you shall hear at all events what he says about it. The doctor then opened the folded paper and read as follows. Notwithstanding the incredulity that has been shown regarding vampires, I am in a condition from my own knowledge to own the existence of one. I think he is dead now. His name was Varney, at least that was the name he went by, and he came strangely enough under my observation in connection with some dear friends of mine named B. Is that all? Said Mr. Smith. Not quite, replied Dr. North. He goes on to say that but for touching the feeling of living persons, he could and would unfold some curious particulars respecting vampires, and that if he lived long enough, he would perhaps do so, by which I suppose he meant if he outlived the parties whose feelings he was afraid of hurting by any premature disclosures. And, faltered Sir George, do you draw a conclusion from all that my daughter has been visited by one of these persons? Surely not. Maybe, Sir George. I draw no conclusions at all. I merely throw out the matter for your consideration. It is always worth while considering these matters in every possible aspect. That is all. A most horrible aspect, said Sir George. Truly dreadful, said Mr. Smith. This shall be settled, said Charles. Edwin and I will take upon ourselves tomorrow night to set this question completely at rest. At this moment there was a loud cry of "Help! help! help!" in the voice of Emma, and they all rushed upstairs with great speed. "Oh, this way," she cried, meeting them at the head of the stairs. "Come to Clara." They followed her, and when they reached the room, they found to their horror and surprise that Clara was dead. Chapter 207 of Varney the Vampire, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Varney the Vampire, Volume 3, by Peckett PREST. Chapter 207. Family Troubles, The House of Mourning. It was too true. It was not the mere appearance of death, but the reality of the fell destroyer that the Crofton family had to mourn. She who, but a few short hours since, was in all the bloom of apparent health and youth and beauty, was now no more. The poor father, the sisterless sister, the astonished, indignant, and agonized brothers formed a group that was too sad to contemplate. As they gazed upon the wreck of her whom they had all loved so fondly, they could scarcely believe that death had indeed claimed her as her own. They thought her more beautiful than death, and could not, as they gazed tremblingly upon her still form, bring themselves to believe that she had indeed gone from them forever. Dr. North, however, soon put all doubt upon the subject to rest by an announcement that her spirit had really fled. In vain he tried all the means that his art suggested. That mysterious and mighty something which we call life, which we miss and yet see no loss, which is so great, yet so evanescent and impalpable, was gone. "Come away," he said. "We can do no good here now. Come away, all of you." "Oh, no, no," cried Sir George. "Why should we leave my child?" "That," said the doctor, as he pointed to the corpse, "is not your child." The old man shuddered, and with an aspect upon his face as if 10 years of added age had at least passed over him in those few moments, he suffered them to lead him from the room. They all passed downstairs again, leaving Emma in her own chamber along with the female servants, so hastily again called up to remain with her. When the dining room was reached once more, Mr. Smith, who bore all the appearance of being quite thunderstruck by what had passed, spoke in the most feeling manner, saying, "This is truly one of the most affecting circumstances I ever remember. It is dreadful. A young girl to be at once snatched from a circle of admiring and loving friends in this manner, is too sad a picture for any one with a heart to feel for the distresses of others to contemplate. What, sir, is your opinion," to Dr. North, "of the actual cause of death?" "The shock to the nervous system I suspect has induced some sudden action of the heart which has been too much for vitality." "Dreadful!" "Alas, alas!" sobbed Sir George. "What have I done, that Heaven should thus launch against me the bolts of its bitterest vengeance? Why should I be robbed of my child? Surely there were angels enough in heaven without taking mine from me." "Hush, hush," said Dr. North. "You are in grief, sir, and know not what you say. These were not, else the words would fall from the lips of such a man as you are." The bereaved father was silent, and the sons looked at him with countenances in which dismay was most strongly pictured. They seemed as if as yet they had not become fully alive to the loss they had sustained, or of what had really happened within the once happy domestic circle, of which the fairest portion was now so ruthlessly dragged from them. "It is like a dream," said Edwin, addressing his brother Charles in a whisper. "It is much more like a dream than aught else in the world." "It is, it is. Oh, tell me that this is not real." "It is too real," said the doctor. "You must bow with what amount of resignation you can call to your aid to that stroke of destiny which you cannot control. You should consider that as regards her who has gone from you, that she is now no object of pity. Death is an evil to you in your loss, but it is the end of all evil and pain to her, and then again, She has but gone a few years, after all, earlier than usual, for how long shall we, I, the best and strongest of us, be behind her? This was consolation of the right sort, and was sure to have its effect upon persons in the habit of conversing coolly and calmly upon general subjects, so that in a short time the father even felt much better, and although the sons were quite convinced of their loss, they no longer looked at each other with such bewildered aspects, but exhibited the rational grief of men. Charles spoke after a time with great energy, saying, "It is true that we may call our reason to our aid, and contrive to rid ourselves of our grief in a great measure. But there is another duty we have to perform, and that is, to diligently inquire why and how it was that our sister got this horrible fright that has had the effect of hurrying her into eternity." "Yes, brother," said Edwin, "you are right. Our sister's memory shall be vindicated, and woe be to him who has brought this desolation and grief upon us." Sir George looked from one of his sons to the other, but said nothing. He appeared to be prostrated too much by his feelings, and the doctor strongly urging him to retire to rest, he shortly did so, where we will leave him for a time, hoping that he will find the oblivion of sleep creep over him, and knit up the ravelled sleeve of care. "Now," said Dr. North, "here we are 4 men with cool heads, and active enough judgments. For God's sake, let us try to come to some sort of conclusion about this dreadful affair. What do you say, Charles?" "In the first place, I should recommend that the house be searched diligently, in order that we may see if any stranger is in it, or discover any means by which an entrance to the premises has been effected. We don't know but that after all some robbery may be the aim, and that the fright of our sister which has had so fatal an effect may be the consequence merely of the appearance of a thief in her room." "Agreed," said Edwin. "Let the search of the house be our first step." 2 of the new servants were summoned with lights, and the party of 4 proceeded to an examination of the house, which on account of its size was not a very short process, for there was so many staircases and rooms opening the one into the other that the hiding places were numerous enough. At length, however, they were not only satisfied that no one was concealed on the premises, but likewise that all the fastenings were quite secure, and had been made so before the servants retired to rest. The mystery, therefore, was rather increased. Had there not been the collateral evidence of Emma, and the singular fact of the fastening up of the doors of the doctor's and Mr. Smith's bedchambers, no doubt the whole affair would have rested where it was, and have been put down as a remarkable death arising from the influence of a dream. But that was out of the question. Somebody had been seen, and whether that somebody was really not an inhabitant of this world was the question. In the midst of all this, the day began to dawn. Sir George had had no sleep, but he had done himself some good in the solitude of his own chamber. He had prayed long and earnestly, and his prayers had had the effect which they almost invariably have upon all imaginative persons, namely, of bringing him an amount of mental calmness, peace, and resignation, highly desirable in his circumstances. The breakfast table was laid in silence by the servants, and when Sir George met his sons and his guests, he spoke calmly enough, saying to them, "You will no more hear from me the accents of grief or of despair. I accept what consolation I can find, but as a man and a father I will have justice. My child has been terrified to death, and I will find who has done the deed, for let him be whom he may, he is as much her murderer as though he had plunged a dagger in her heart." "It is so," said Mr. Smith. "Being so, then let him beware." Varney thought that as the father uttered these last words, he glanced in a peculiar manner at him, but he was not quite sure that such was the case. Had he been sure, perhaps, he would have taken other steps than he did. Little more passed during the breakfast, but when the meal was over, Sir George said, "Edwin, we are but dull and poor company to Mr. Smith. It will amuse him, perhaps, if you take him through the grounds and show him the estate." Edwin made no objection, and as the thing was put in the shape of an amusement to him, Varney could only say some civil things and rise to go. "I regret," he said, "to be of so much trouble." "Not at all," said Edwin. "No trouble, sir. My own mind, God knows, wants something to distract it from too close a contemplation of its own thoughts. If you will accompany me in a walk over the estate, it will, perhaps, put me into better spirits." They left the room, and when they were gone, Sir George Crofton rose and shut the door, fastening it on the inside carefully, rather to the surprise of the doctor and his son Charles, who looked at him in silence. "Charles," he then said, "and you, doctor, I have something particular to say to you." "What is it? What is it?" "God forgive me if I am wrong, but I suspect our guest." "Mr. Smith?" "Yes. I don't like his looks at all. Now we know nothing of him but from his own report. We have searched the house right through, or at least you have, you tell me, and found nothing. He is the only stranger within our doors. Perhaps it is uncharitable to suspect him, but I cannot help it, the thought came too strongly upon me last night, as I was alone in my chamber, for me to overcome it. I have now spoken to you both frankly, and tell me what are your thoughts." "I don't like him," said Charles. "He is a singular man," said Dr. North. What now, if he were Why do you hesitate, father? What would you say?" "Go on, sir," said Dr. North, with a nod that signified, "I know very well what you are going to say." "Go on, sir." "What, then, if it were really true, that there were such things, and he is a vampire?" Charles sprang to his feet in surprise, and said, "Good God! You put a frightful idea into my brain that will now never leave it. A vampire?" "Heaven forbid," said Sir George, "that I should say such a thing heedlessly, or that I should take upon myself to assert that such is the case. I merely throw it out as a supposition, a horrible one, I grant, but yet one that perhaps deserves some consideration." "Get rid of him," said Dr. North. "It is difficult after telling him that he is welcome to stay, to now tell him that we want him to go. I would much prefer watching him closely, and endeavoring by such means, either to confirm or do away entirely with my suspicions. And you can take an opportunity of speaking to Edwin upon the subject, quietly and carefully." "I will, father." "Then we can be all upon the alert. But above all things, I charge you to say nothing to Emma of the really terrific idea. Only I should say that tonight it is in the direction of her chamber that I would wish to keep the closest watch." "And that, too, without her knowing it," said the doctor. "If she is aware of anything of the sort, there is no knowing what tricks her imagination might play her, and now, Sir George, I must say that I take the greatest interest in the matter, and will with your permission remain here until I am sent for. Poor Ringwood still remains insensible, and I take it that under the circumstances that is really a mercy, for what a sad communication has to be made to him, when he does recover sufficiently to hear it." "Sad indeed." It was now finally agreed among them that there was to be no variation whatever in their conduct towards Mr. Smith, but that after they had taken leave of him for the night, and had all gone to bed, they should each glide out of his chamber, and wait at the extreme end of the corridor in silence, to mark if anything should happen. This was duly announced to Edwin, who, with a shudder, announced that he had his suspicions too of Mr. Smith, so he of course came into the scheme at once. And now they waited rather anxiously for the night to come again. Chapter 207